an academic or you're a regular guy. We have to be fearless.
FrontlineTV.com.
Dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And let us go into the breach, dear brothers and sisters. There's so much to talk about. We're on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Make sure that you go onto the website, crusadechannel.com, kick the tires, open the hood, look over everything, look at the style of the car. When you look at the Crusade Channel, you're going to say, you know what? I want to be a part of what's going on there. That's what Joe and I do, and that's what we're asking you to do. There's a great lineup there at the Crusade Channel. Mike Church has put together a very special enterprise there, and we ask you all to support that. When you see our ugly mugs on social media, particularly on YouTube, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And the primary place that you can find us is the Frontline TV on YouTube. And as I said, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Now, there's a lot going on. Joe and I can't possibly talk in 1 hour about everything, but we want to pick our spots. And obviously, you know, we're trying to come at things from a bit of a different angle. Okay. So there's a shooting in Texas, which is obviously tragic. And I promise you all out there, one thing you're not going to get from Joe and I is talking points. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong. If I hear a conservative talking point or if I hear a liberal talking point, my brains explode, as my mother would say. Oh, yeah. Because, Joe, you know what? It tells you something about conservatives as well as liberals, okay? It's constantly, you know, statistics are, you know, you could use, and that's all good. You have to provide or back up your argument with facts and statistics. But I'm getting tired, Joe, of talking points, and we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about things on the way we say, at a kitchen table level. Okay, I don't need to know what the American Enterprise Institute has to say about something in order to talk about it at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. So that's what we're going to have, is an honest conversation about that. Honestly, after we talk about what's going on in Texas and the response to it, we got a real problem in America as Christians. We got a real problem, not with liberals, not with the left, okay, not with the Marxists. We got a problem with conservatives, and we need to highlight that. This is a major issue. This is not some tertiary issue that we're just going to talk about when we're at the cocktail party, okay? Christians have a problem with conservatives, or let me say it more appropriately. Conservative establishment has a problem with Christians, those who adhere to traditional Christian principles, particularly on the matters of sexual morality. And then we got to talk about elitism in the schools if we get to it. We might not even get to it. Where Randy Weingarten, Joe, again, the vein pops out of my head when I think of Randy Weingarten. We're going to have to talk about the elitism coming from the public school education establishment. And all these things are important. We're going to try to get to everything. And with that, I'm handing it over to Joe Resinello.
Let's start this one with a prayer, because I think this is a very important message, and hopefully God will guide it. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who sought your help or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly unto you, a virgin of virgins, our mother. To you we come, before you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your clemency hear and answer us, amen.
Amen.
Name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen.
So,
Joe, about 10 years ago, when Sandy Hook happened in Connecticut, I was in India. I was basically in a room with 4 guys. One of the guys is one of my children's godfather, another gentleman from New Jersey, this guy Terry from Western Jersey, and then a dude from Australia. Terry has a BlackBerry. This is in the days of old when BlackBerries were on. And I'll never forget.
Joe, I remember those. Not for nothing. I never, even then, back when they were in style, I never had one. I had a flip phone. When the BlackBerries were up there, I had a flip phone because I'm like, it's just a keyboard. I didn't get it. But anyway, I
missed it all. But Terry had a BlackBerry. He was in his 70s. He was doing some volunteer work at, the latter part of his life. And, we were winding down the day. And he says there's a massive shooting in Connecticut. On the spot. This is 10 years ago. I was like, this is not going to stop. This is not, and it hasn't. You have Parkland in Florida. You have that crazy kid in Colorado. He looked like the Joker from Batman. Do you remember that kid who shot up the movie theater? No, before Columbine. This is after Columbine, rather. He had like crazy hair. His hair is all crazy. And then, you have Buffalo. You have now this incident in Texas. It's the same MO. It's the same MO. And you know something? You talk about conservatives, you talk about liberals. No one wants to get the heart of the heart of the subject because, listen, the answer is hard. Everyone's talking about the peripherals. The peripherals. It's guns. It's this. It's the Second Amendment. Blah, 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 blah. You know what it is? It's wounded kids. Why are they wounded? Because the family has broken down. There it is. It's the same kid. And guess what? Rinse and repeat. Do you think this is going to stop?
No way.
No chance. No way. No chance.
No, I went to work. I want you to
stupid
continue.
argument. Please continue.
Joe,
please.
I want you to continue. I want you to continue. But I'm going to give you an example. I went to work, and I know I work with an avowed leftist. Okay. And I made the mistake of getting into a conversation with him on these things a few weeks ago and realized very quickly, not a good idea. When this happened last week and I went to work, okay, I was keeping my mouth shut. But obviously, because we are who we are and we keep our ears open because that's what we're supposed to do. And that's all I heard was him talking to somebody else. And all he kept saying was, we have to change laws. We have to change laws. We have to change laws. That's why I cut you off, Joe, because guess what? That's not just, I know it is anecdotal. It's just my experience. I know that that's what you hear all across the spectrum. And I'm going to kick it back over to you. No, you're wrong. You diagnosed the problem, but you don't have the right solution. Your solution is to change laws, and I'm going to kick it back to you, Joe Resino, at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel. That ain't the solution.
Well, that's the low-hanging fruit, because the solution, like most solutions, is hard. It's to be devoted to your wife from the moment you get married to the moment you die, to sacrifice for your family at all costs. That's hard. That's hard for liberals. That's hard for conservatives. And no one wants to go there. It's easy to talk about the gun. I got news for you. And I'll make a full confession. Listen, I don't have guns. People might say, oh, you're this, you're that, you're for the NRA, blah, 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 blah. I don't have guns. Where I live, to be completely honest with you, it's a community where it's small. The police show up when you call. You live next door to people. It's not violent. And people say, you still need guns. Okay, that's your opinion. I don't have guns. I just say that. I throw it out there. I'm not a gun nut. But what I will say is this. These kids, all of them, are deeply troubled. Why are they troubled? Why are they troubled? They're a product of the sexual revolution.
That's right, Joe.
And that's America up and down the block. And here's another thing.
Go ahead.
Not all kids who are the product of divorce kill people. But I will tell you this. Every kid that is the product of the divorce is affected, is deeply hurt. Every kid. Don't rationalize it. Don't think it's not the case. Every kid. I know many, and I've known them the arc of my entire life. And it's
Joe,
ignored, it's normalized, and there we have it.
Joe, we grew up with them. Our best friends growing up.
Oh, okay? Absolutely.
All right. And the thing is, we knew their fathers. I've said this before at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. I've said this before on the show. Okay. We knew their fathers. They were in their lives. Okay. They had a problem with the mom. We're not excusing it, but at least from a kid's point of view, we can understand it. Okay. They got divorced. I knew every father of that was divorced from the mother of my friend. Okay. So if their fathers were out of the picture or their parents were divorced, I still knew their fathers. Their fathers were still in their lives. Their fathers were still there in the neighborhood. Again, I'm not saying that divorce is great or anything like that. I hope nobody gets me the wrong way. But their fathers were in their lives. You know, some Joe, I'm going to throw some Joe. Joe, I want to throw something out there to you. I really want to kick this right back to you. I will make an argument that those fathers, when we grew up, were more in the lives of their sons and daughters, okay, even after having been divorced, than some fathers are now, even though their fathers are married to their mothers.
But even still, I think it's a rationalization. When you get divorced, something breaks. It's not natural for a child. It's not natural. Even when you fight with your wife, it's not natural for a child to witness it. I'm just telling you, it causes trouble,
Right.
like it or not. And that's why this is not addressed. It's not talked about. Listen, disturbed people will hurt people regardless. Regardless. I'll give an example. Nice, France. There was a horrible incident a number of years ago where a truck drove down a promenade and killed tons, like a number of
Well, like
people.
went on to the where the joggers were running and
Bingo, like a
the
broad, like in
walkway, the
Jersey
pathway.
terms, it's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
boardwalk. This, if you're willing to kill a child, innocent, in cold blood, you will figure out a way. Timothy McVeigh made a bomb. He blew up a federal building. You will do it regardless. I'm saying this as an agnostic to guns. I don't have guns. I don't wave the NRA flag. I'm saying this as a person. I'm trying to be objective, but to be honest, I think I'm being practical.
Right.
I'm being practical. These are disturbed kids. Let's put them aside for a minute. Let's look at teen suicide. That's up off the charts. Let's look at the Oxycontin addiction.
Well, Joe,
Off the charts.
that's important thing to bring up is about the teen suicide. Some of these, again, usually the same problem that's going on underneath, which is the breakdown of the family. Some of these kids, okay, they project their anger outwards, okay, and then you get a situation like you've gotten in Texas or Sandy Hook or whatever. Sometimes it's projected inwards, and it's sad, and they wind up killing themselves. They hate themselves. Sometimes it winds up being both. They go out and they kill others, but ultimately, you are correct. The problem is these kids, okay, a lot of these kids, what's imposed on them because their parents, I want to try to be charitable, Joe, but most of the time people get divorced because they're selfish. I'm sorry. You can't have a divorce rate go from 5% to 50% in the last 100 years because
Well, we can
out of
talk
any
about
other,
that because
we can
people
talk
don't know
about
what
that.
marriage is.
But
that's
these kids are
another-
victims of that. And yes,
Oh, 100%.
and Joe, listen, you're a person that kills other people. I got a problem. I'm not going to call you a victim. But in the context of what we're talking about with these young teenage kids, a lot of the times they're victims of their parents' selfishness. And their anger either goes out or it goes towards them or it goes both. And any way you slice it, it is so freaking tragic because nobody wants to look in the mirror and no parent wants to look in the mirror and say, what did I do to contribute to my child?
Well, Joe,
being
that's
this
why
way?
it's not going to stop. And we're going to have this same conversation. I said it 10 years ago on a bunk in India. On a bunk in India. This doesn't stop.
Right.
It's the same kid. It's the same kid. And society refuses to address the ill. It refuses to address the ill, partially because we don't know what marriage is, Joe. We don't know what it is. Marriage is this. My job is to get my wife to heaven. Her job is to get me to heaven. It's not about compromise. It's about 100% sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's about not having the car you want. It's about not having the house you want. It's about not having the vacation you want. It's about not having the clothes you want. It's about sacrificing for your wife and for your kids, and we're not willing to do it.
But here's the thing, Joe. Now, Greg Abbott, okay, now I got this from an article by John Daniel Davidson in the Federalist. Now, here's the point. Now, he made a good point. Now, this is where we got to get into, Joe, and for our audience out there at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online, we got to try to clear the fog, if I may, a little bit, okay? And I think Davidson makes a good point. Talking about the politics of it, okay? Greg Abbott, we like Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott is a Roman Catholic. Hasn't done everything we'd like, okay? Again, he's a politician, so we got to deal with that nonsense. He said, why is it that the majority of those 60 years we did not have school shootings and we do now? He was talking about the fact that 18-year-olds have been able to buy rifles in Texas for more than 60 years. But then Davidson points out, like, Joe, that's why I think sometime at some point in the future, we got to have John Daniel Davidson on the front line with Joe and Joe. We could get in a lot of trouble with that guy. You know why? Because he asked the questions that we are. He says, Abbott's not asking the right question. Yeah, if you have families that are intact, guess what, Joe? You can own Uzis. You can own bazookas. And guess what? Your kid's not going into a public school and killing other kids. If the family's intact, why? Is it perfect? No, Joe, let's bring it back to Newark, New Jersey, okay? Joe, we grew up with hooligans. I think some may argue at some point in our lives when we were kids, we were the hooligans, okay? We didn't see this back then, Joe. We didn't see this. Why? Because we lived in the Garden of Eden? No, but because there was a family structure. You had fathers and strong fathers that kept their kids. Joe, let me tell you something. I'm going to kick it over to you. Some of the most troublemaking kids that we grew up with in the schools that we went to, they wouldn't even be a blip on the radar now because these schools now are dealing with things on a much different level. Am I wrong, Joe?
No, absolutely, Joe. That's a fact. And here's the thing. I mean, it comes down to this. Divorce is normalized and people rationalize it. And here's the thing. No matter who the kid is, no matter how strong you think your kid is, no matter how level-headed you think your kid is, it affects your kid. Period. End of story. That doesn't mean they're going to go into a school and shoot them. It means you're wounding them. And here's the thing. The sexual revolution and its ideas have failed America. And we're not willing to face that. That's Republicans, that's liberals, that's conservatives, that's leftists.
We're going to get into that in the next segment, Joe Rossinello at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel, always on there. We're going to get into that. But you're exactly right. Joe, if there's one common element between conservatives and liberals is that they stay here. Joe Rossinello, their level is here. They don't want, you are so spot on. They don't want to look deeper. And you diagnosed it correctly. They don't want to look deeper because guess what that forces them to do? They have to look in the mirror and look at themselves. And nobody, and I don't care if you're a dyed-in-the-wool leftist, if you're a right-wing conservative, and that's why Catholics, faithful Catholics, have the proper worldview on this. Because here's the difference, Joe. When you F up, you look in the mirror. And when I do, I look in the mirror. You look at the rest of the landscape out there in our culture, nobody wants to look in the mirror. Nobody wants to say, you want to know something? Yeah, I know that person is a moral agent. They committed that crime, but maybe I did something to contribute to it. And nobody wants to take that blame. The left,
Joe, very few people
they're
look
pointing
at
the
their
finger
life.
at guns
Listen, 'cause
and the
that's
NRA.
hard.
No, I'm sorry, Joe. Go
No, but
ahead.
it's hard. To change requires effort. And to be honest with you, we're not willing to do it. And here's another problem. We don't recognize sin anymore. You see, we don't. It's not even taught to the degree it should be. That doesn't mean you beat people over the head with it because people don't respond to that, to be honest with you. But the reality is the reality. And here's the thing. There is a concept in Christian circles that everyone goes to heaven. I got news for you. Jesus Christ said differently in scripture, just so you know.
Oh, yeah.
And here's how you get to heaven. You follow the teachings of Jesus and the church he founded. That's how you get to heaven. I got news for you. And I'm sorry that something different has become a mainstream idea, like divorce. Divorce is so common. It's so common. And here's another thing. People get divorced because of situations, because of flaws of people. If you're married validly, sacramentally, and you get divorced, and say you don't get married again, and you don't have sex outside of your single state, you're not in a state of sin.
No.
But once again, sex is almost something as I cannot live without. You have urges, but the idea of I am not going to go there because it's not proper is completely a foreign idea to Americans.
To all, Joe, by the way, to all Americans. All the like when people talk about all the leftists, they're crying because Roe versus Wade is getting overturned, and those evil conservatives agree. I would like to tell these leftists, those evil conservatives, they agree with you on sexual liberation, on everything up to abortion. But they're right with you there on contraception, on divorce, on all of it. The only thing is conservatives will stop short, real conservatives at least, and say, you can't kill your kid. Okay, if you have sex, that's your choice. You have to bear personal responsibility for having done so. But Joe, I agree. It's all a part of the same freaking swamp. It's all a part of Americanism. And the thing is, so you do anything you want. Okay, in other words, the left says you could just. Let's get into this for a second. Okay, Joe. One thing in this whole thing that's really bothered me beyond belief. I'm sorry. I try, Joe, not successfully at the front line with Joe and Joe all the time. I try to be understanding. I try to understand people's worldview. I cannot listen to Meathead one more time saying that the Republican Party, of which you and I are barely members of, okay, barely, I emphasize that, okay, we are Catholic conservatives is what we are, but calling the Republican Party a party that has blood on its hands, while at the same time, he's a fist in the air, kill your baby up to the day it's born, liberal on abortion. And I'll tell you, in this whole thing, Joe, unfortunately, we have to contend with that too, because the same people that say Republicans or NRA types don't care about the kids in Sandy Hook. They don't care about the kids in Uvalde. You haven't plucked a hair for the 62 million kids that have been killed since Roe versus Wade in America. And now you're going to preach to everybody else. Joe, I'd love your comments on
Well,
that.
most politicians talk on the surface because, frankly, that's what people can digest. I mean, most people live on the
Well,
surface.
Joe, I was talking about Meathead.
No, but Rob
we haven't
Reiner,
beaten up on him in a while.
listen, Rob Reiner, I'm going to get to that in a moment in my view, but most people live on the surface because to live below the surface requires sacrifice, requires change, and frankly, requires you to be the odd man out in society. And people are not willing to do that because, as I've said on this show and as on many shows, everyone wants to get invited to the barbecue. They don't want to be the odd man out. They don't want to have ideas that rub people the wrong way. That's just the way it is. And that's how people live. But let's talk about why, particularly the left, particularly the Democratic Party, has an issue with the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is a check to power. Now, what has changed since it was implemented is this: the way war is fought. Now, at the time it was written, you had guns that had maybe 2 good shots in them if you were lucky, and then it was a fist fight. And you fought with bayonets in a field. It's not the way it works anymore. So that has changed, let's be honest. But what has not changed is the Second Amendment is a check to power. What I mean by that is this: there are people in this country who do not agree with Rob Reiner, with Jeff Bezos, with Jamie Dimon, who live in very, very safe environments, who have police that respond to them in a minute. They have money. They have security systems on their house. And there are people out there, and they know it, who have guns, serious guns, that threaten them. And that is why they want to get rid of the Second Amendment. Anytime you listen to a person of power, I go to meetings like this all the time, town hall meetings. Nothing is said directly. It's what's not said. It's like what's that dude who was the mayor of Chicago? He was in the Obama administration. What did he say?
Rahm Emanuel.
No emergency, no tragedy should be
don't
wasted.
let a crisis go to waste.
This is the argument to get rid of the gun that threatens Rob Reiner. Rob Reiner does not like the idea that there is a check to power.
Right.
That is why they argue vehemently. It's the same with abortion. Why do they want to get rid of abortion? They used to say it's not a baby. Well, science shows otherwise now. They've changed their rhetoric. Why do they want to get rid of abortion? They want to get rid of abortion because of this. I can't have casual sex.
Right.
I can't have casual sex. And if a child comes of that action, I have to get rid of it.
Right. Joe, that's exactly right. I mean, and I'm glad you brought that up. I am very tired. I respect constitutional lawyers, constitutional scholars. I do. Okay. They went to Harvard, but guess what? The Constitution is written in a way that I do not have to have gone to Harvard to understand the Second Amendment. I don't care what my leftist friends, and they are friends. Well, some of them don't want to be my friends, but at least I work with them. Okay. Based on what you just said, when you say, listen, by the way, you do realize the Second Amendment is not meant for hunting and things like that. It's meant for self-defense, primarily from the government. They'll start. You want to talk about being called names, Joe Rossinello? You're delusional. What do you mean I'm delusional? We don't have a tyrannical government right now. Let's bring it back to the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel. We've spoken about it before. Javier Becerra is not a tyrant. He's not attacking and trying to curtailing the activities of the Catholic Church. Joe Biden is not a tyrant. Nancy Pelosi is not a tyrant. They're all tyrants. Ben Shapiro, who I'm not the biggest fan of, made a good point. He says, if you are going to come into my home to take my child away because I'm teaching my child that homosexuality is wrong based on what he believes as a Jew, as we believe as Catholics, okay? He goes, then if you're going to come and take my child away and you're a government official, I'm paraphrasing, then I'm going to pick up a gun and I'm going to defend myself and my child from you taking him away. Basically saying I'm going to shoot you. See, that is what the Second Amendment is about. You can't come into my home and tell me what to do, take away my kids, destroy my family, do any of that. Most importantly, you can't oppress us. The left, Joe, and this is where it does get political, they don't want to hear that argument, even though that's their purpose. Their purpose in all of this, having to do with tragedies like Uvalde and Sandy Hook and everything else, is they want to take away your guns. And when we, as normal people who have read something about history, say, the Nazis did that. Castro did that. The Stalin did that. All the tyrants, even just the modern era, Joe, you don't even go back before that. All the tyrants of the modern era, their common impulse, their first action is to disarm the citizenry. Why? Because when you send in the government agents to control you, there's nobody shooting back. And I wish people would at least be honest enough to acknowledge that.
Well, let's stress this. We're not talking about shooting back. We're not advocating about shooting back, but we're confusing apples and oranges in this discussion, not us. People look to incidents like this, and then they immediately point to the Second Amendment and to guns. But it's not because of the incident. It's because of what I'm talking about and what Joe's talking about. It's a threat to their security, the power broker. And here's another thing, and I will defend this till the end of time. These kids would hurt someone anyway.
That's right.
They are violent, they are disturbed, and they are violent and they're disturbed because they have been abandoned by our society. They have been abandoned by their parents. And I got news for you. If I was abandoned by my parents, if Joe was abandoned by your parents, and anyone who's listening tonight was treated in the same way, God help us too.
Joe, I want to make a comment on that. And I know you'll agree with me on this. I'm not trying to be harsh in any way at the front line with Joe and Joe. Sometimes, Joe, kids that we grew up with just grew up into just straight up evil bastards. It wasn't where, I mean, Joe, you knew them and I knew them. I knew kids growing up. They're dead now or in jail or both. Or no, well, you can't be dead and in jail, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I get it.
Where when they were teenagers, they were evil. And then when they grew up, they were still evil. And then we're in adulthood, they were still evil. They ended up in jail, like I said, or dead in a shootout with police or in a street fight on Bloomfield Avenue, or something like that. you know, in Newark. Okay. Sometimes kids are just evil bastards. Okay. In which case you hope law enforcement catches up with them soon, or in which case you have the ability to defend yourself when they try to attack other people. And that's one thing that nobody wants to talk about. They talk about the guns, Joe. We're going to talk about the guns. Gun laws should be changed. And they cry, Joe, by the way. Did you notice the crying, Joe?
Some of it was so fake. Did you see what the hell is that couple that on MSNBC?
Oh,
She's
Scarborough and Mika
Oh my
Brzezinski.
lord, bro.
You know,
That
not for
was
nothing.
such
Joe
bad
Scarborough
acting.
used
Did
to
you
be
see her
conservative.
trying to pretend to cry?
Oh, it's horrible. Joe,
I mean, it was
listen,
embarrassing.
Joe, I'm a
I was
trained
just like,
actor.
oh my gosh.
Joe, I'm a pretty good actor, and I'm a trained actor from back in the day, old school, East Village, okay? Herbert Berghoff, all right? Uta Hagen, okay? Believe me when I tell you, Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough, those are the fakest. You
Bro,
couldn't
if
pull
I was
that
the
off
producer,
in
I would have been like, stop the show.
Stop the show, right?
I swear, I would have been like, stop the show. That's so not, it's so not believable. It's actually sad because
Right.
it's about power because they're threatened too. They're threatened by Earl in West Virginia, who's eating teriyaki beef jerky, drinking a 24-ounce glass of Mountain Dew, and he has an AK-47. And the idea that Earl has that scares the piss out of Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski.
And here's my question. And I've said this. I haven't said it recently because, again, Joe, unlike a lot of people that I encounter in my life, I actually and everybody at this show knows that Joe and I have very strong opinions. And of course, you know, we're a couple of big mouth jamokes from New Jersey. We love to talk. Joe, I've been very prudent over the last, let's say, even a couple of years. All right. Some of it has to do with I don't want to lose my job. Some of it has to do with the fact that I am not a hurtful person. I'm not. I really believe that about myself. I don't go out of my way to hurt other people. Okay. But here's the thing. I go to work and I see every job. Joe, I know you know where I'm going with this at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel. Every job has their dyed in the wool leftist, just lapdog believes everything the left says. Barack Obama should be beatified and canonized, and so should Bill Clinton and all that. And when something like this happens, they come to work, and all the women at work, and I'm speaking specifically about a male in this case, and the male comes to work, and all the women are hugging him because of such a tragedy. All those kids, and they hug him like they got to comfort him. And you know what it tells me? I just sit there, Joe, and I just shake my head and I say, are you living in reality?
No, too many
No.
people don't live in reality, Joe. That's the problem. Here's another piece of advice. God is reality.
Oh, God is the ultimate
God is reality. And here's another thing that people
Joe, real quick, Joe, let's get Catholic real quick. Let's get real Catholic real quick. And I'm going to hand it back to you. As Aquinas said, God is the ground of all being. That is reality. Hand it over to you, Joe.
The metaverse. People live in the metaverse. The conservatives live in the metaverse too. I got news for you. Many of them. They live in the metaverse. They're not living. Listen, you have to live in the valley. We're in the valley, dude. We're never going to have perfection. You have to go out there. Christ went out there. He got mauled. His parents got mauled. You have to get out there. People live in friggin' the metaverse, dude.
Right.
Listen, we're never going to find heaven on earth, but that doesn't mean you don't live the truth, speak the truth, and suffer for it. No one wants to do that. No one wants to do that. And here's the deal. And I used to say this when I taught within the church, RCIA, just like gravity. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to affect you. Oh, I don't believe in gravity. Okay, jump off the roof.
Jump out the window.
See what happens. It's the same thing. The laws of God, the natural law, which is written on every human heart, i.e., divorce, broken families. When that occurs, there are consequences.
Joe, let me put it in a time frame. When did the sexual revolution start? Let's say 60s, mid to late 60s, right? Summer of love. Joe, I was actually born right after the Summer of Love. I was born in 1967. Okay, in October. So let's fast forward to the 90s. Okay, this is what the sexual revolution has led to, because in that 20 years from the 60s to the 90s, Joe, unless somebody wants to tell us in the chat room at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel, unless somebody wants to tell me I'm wrong, Joe, we didn't see this when we were growing up. We didn't see this in the 70s and the 80s and even most of the 90s. This is a recent phenomenon. It took time for the sexual revelation to seep deep into
Revolution.
our culture. What's that?
Revolution. You said revelation. It's
Revolution.
all
I'm
good.
sorry. Right.
Dude, please.
But it took time. But when it took hold, okay, this is what Joe, why is it that when people quote scripture, they're dismissed right away? But when you quote scripture, it's true. You reap what you sow.
That isn't it, dude. That's not a convenient truth. You see, people, again, they live in the metaverse, dude. I don't live in reality. They think somehow they're going to do X or do Y and it's not going to affect you. It doesn't work that way. You see, adults, the greatest teacher of life, someone told me this. They're not even religious. One of the wisest things ever told to me. The greatest teacher of life is life itself. God puts that in front of you because most people don't listen. They don't. So life occurs. Situations take place. The smart person, actually, no, that's not true. It's not the smart person. The humble person says, I was wrong. That was incorrect. I'm going to make a change. The person who says, please forgive me. I made a mistake.
Right.
That's the person that thrives. Plenty of smart people refuse to do that.
Right.
You see, life is the greatest teacher. God puts that in front of you. People, though, just double down, triple down. They refuse to do what I just said. And as a result, their life is a misery. And they refuse to acknowledge why. In many cases, they know why. But they will not do what I just said. They will not say, you know something, I was wrong. Absolutely wrong. This doesn't work. You know something? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. To man and to God. Help me to do better. No, wrong. And that's why I say they live in rationalizations and they live in a world that they create now with the internet. Christopher Columbus, dude, you put on, go into Twitter, you go into friggin' Facebook. It's a friggin' wacko world, dude. And here's the thing. People might say, you're wacko. Oh, am I wacko? Look at my life. Look at the fruit of my life.
That's right.
You tell a tree by the fruit it bears. Look at the fruit of my life. I have a stable job. I pay my bills. I have a good marriage. I have 5 children. I follow the law. I'm a decent and respectable person. Am I crazy? Have my choices resulted in chaos, or have they resulted in good fruit?
Joe, what are you talking about?
I won't acknowledge that because that requires for me to change, and I'm not willing to do it.
Well, let me tell you something. That's exactly right, because most people don't want to acknowledge that they might need to change. Again, this goes back to what we said earlier. Joe, let me tell you something. This is a bit, like I said, anecdotal, okay? But I'm going to give you an example. I've said to you, you know this, you're my brother-in-law. Everybody out there at the front line with Joe and Joe knows that we're family, okay? I have embarked on fostering and with the intention of adopting a young man, 12-year-old boy, who is the greatest gift that God ever gave me and my wife. Okay. Do you know what I find myself doing? And Joe, I'm going to kick it back to you because I really want your opinion on this. Okay. I am the laziest of God's creatures. If I could hit the lottery, I would love it because I don't want to go to work. Okay. Have I worked my whole life since I'm 7? Absolutely. Because God's not giving me the lottery. But having said that, okay, Joe, I'll tell you something. In the last year, okay, since several months since we had this young man, and things that we have to do now that we moved out of New Jersey and have to make certain maneuvers. Joe, you want to know something? Again, I say this as someone humbly saying, I don't like to have to sacrifice. when you do, the fruit is immeasurable. And I've had to. That's my
Of
point in
course you
telling you this
do.
story.
Love requires it.
I've had to, do the things that I do for my wife and my foster son, who's going to be our son. That's one thing, okay? Because those things, I'll crawl through the desert to make sure that they're fed. I'm not talking about that. But things that you have to jump through hoops to make things work and things like that. And you got home at 2 o'clock in the morning, you got to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning because you got to go to this state agency or you got over there. The idea of sacrifice, I do realize, Joe, and I'm trying, Joe, please, I'm going to kick it back to you. I'm not trying to be judgmental. Most people don't want to do it. Most people don't want to do it. And I say this as a lazy man, okay, who doesn't want to do it, but I get up and do it. And as Catholic men, I will say this. It's because we pray, and I have the grace of God because I pray, that I'm able to actually get up and do it. And I think that that's one of the problems is that even the most superficial things people don't want to do. What do you
Well,
say, Joe?
sacrifice isn't natural, Joe. We're fundamentally selfish. I've said this on these shows many times. I have children. One of the first phrases out of a child's mouth is this: mine. It's mine. How do you learn to share? Through the family. You learn through the family. It's learned. We're still learning it. Christ willingly gave his life up for sinners, for me, for you, and the worst of the worst. We don't do that naturally. However, through a sacramental marriage, understanding what marriage is, and this circles it back to what's the problem, what's producing people who are killing people, who are committing suicide, who are overdosing on drugs in droves.
Well, talk about that, Joe, too, please.
We
Expand on
don't
that.
understand what marriage is.
Joe, do you remember when we spoke to Joseph Pierce recently? Okay. We had him on our show, and that's going to be available at the Veritas Catholic Network over the next couple of weeks. Remember we were talking about T.S. Eliot? We were talking about the wasteland.
Correct.
This is what we're living in, Joe. We live, and again, this is not a political statement. And those of you who want political statements from Joe and I, even though we make some from time to time, you come to the wrong place. We're trying to diagnose something in our New Jersey kitchen table way, using our PhDs in common sense that are hanging on the wall at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. We were talking about the wasteland, Joe. That's what we're living in. The wasteland has no roots that clutch. The wasteland has no water. There is only rock. That's what we talked about with Joseph Pierce. Okay. That's what we're living in. You could think because you got a bunch of money in the bank that you're bearing a lot of fruit. But when your kid's all effed up, you're not bearing fruit. And I don't care if you got $1 billion in the bank. And that's the problem we're dealing with, Joe. And nobody, like you said, wants to look in the damn mirror. Nobody wants to look at. Nobody wants to do what we're doing. No. Let me rephrase that. There are many out there who are doing what we're doing, but the people who have influence, Joe, the people who can actually affect laws, affect the culture, they're all in the tank for this BS. I'd love to know your opinion.
Well, let's talk about Greg Abbott. This is what he says. Let's talk about Abbott. We'll circle it back to the conversation. Abbott says this: noted that 18-year-olds have been able to buy rifles in Texas for more than 60 years. And then he was asked, why is it that the majority of those 60 years we did not have school shootings, and we do now? But then he stopped short, saying, the reality is, I don't know the answer to that question. Oh, yes, you do.
Yes, you do.
Oh, yes, you do. It's not politically correct to say.
Right.
You see, our politicians are talking heads for a machine. They're not here to solve problems. They're here to keep in power. It's about power. This discussion is not about the children. It's about power. It's about the NRA keeping power, and it's about the Democratic Party taking it.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the kids. Let's be real. The reason why these kids are killing people, the reason why these kids are committing suicide in droves, look at the statistics, the reason why these kids are overdosing is because our families are fractured and they're wounded deeply. And whether you're conservative, whether you're Republican, whether you're a Democrat, call yourself whatever the heck
Whatever you
you
want.
want. We're not willing to call it what it is because that is hard. That requires us to look ourselves in the mirror and to see our faults and to change, and we won't do it.
You're right, Joe Russell. Here's the thing. We got J-Dog. I haven't seen J-Dog before. J-Dog, what's happening? He's in the chat room at crusadechannel.com/chat. He says, Texas is – now, J-Dog, I'm going to address this because I've addressed this before, and we've spoken about it on the show. J-Dog says, Texas is changing. Lots of transplants from California and other blue states are moving there. The landscape is changing. J-Dog, my argument is this. If you're leaving California – and I don't care if you're a liberal. I would tell any liberal who's leaving California or New Jersey. I left New Jersey. I went to Arizona. Or New York, going from New York to Florida. Don't bring your politics if you're a liberal. Because if you're escaping all this BS, what do you think you're going to do if you bring those politics to Texas, to Arizona, to Florida, to Georgia, to the South Carolina and other states? So you're right, J-Dog, that the landscape is changing. What that requires is people to push back against them and get into, this is where Joe and I will get into it and say, we ought to get involved in local politics. Local politics. I have no aspiration of becoming a congressman, okay? But local school boards. Joe, who did we interview? Bill Donahue said, what do the Jews do, the Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn, okay?
School boards, they don't send their kids to public school.
They don't send their kids to public school, but they get on the school board. Why? Because they know it affects their community. Why don't we do that as Christians and Catholics? Why don't we do that? Joe, I swear it's
because we don't get invited to the barbecue, Joe. Because we don't get invited to the barbecue.
Oh,
and everybody thinks you're weird.
Doug Hyken,
you're a weirdo.
You're right. You're a weirdo because you really, I heard somebody recently actually say now that Roe is going to get overturned, well, let's move on to Griswold. My attitude is, hell yeah. Guess who's going to be a postie on that show, Rossanello? Conservatives. They don't want to hear that. What? You want to overturn Griswold that allows for the sale of contraception? You're going to get that from the Ted Cruzes of the world, the Sean Hannitys of the world. That's what we're up against, people of goodwill. That's what we're up against at the front line with Joe and the Crusade Channel always on air. You think it's all about abortion? Abortion's easy. I heard, Joe, I'm going to kick it over to you. I heard somebody say recently, abortion's easy. You know it's hard? Speaking out against transgenderism, gay marriage, okay? In other words, and I wanted to talk about, maybe we can get a little bit into it tonight. That is, Joe, that's the new Joe, listen, the new conservatism. You have to support gay marriage if you're a conservative in America. You heard about that, I'm
said this
sure.
on the show. That's a winner. That's a political winner.
Yes,
just
it
like
is.
listen.
It's a shame, but it is a winner.
It's been mainstreamed. Like, I'll be truthful to you. You want to talk about a case study? The LGBTQ lobby has been so successful in America. Like, this is being objective. You want to talk about success? They have mainstreamed something that is biblically sinful for centuries. Objectively sinful for centuries. It's mainstreamed as divorce is. Divorce is as mainstream as you can get. That's in right. Every circle, from the top echelons of our society to the lowest echelons of society. Oh, that's my second marriage. I was married. You do realize that if your marriage is sacramental, you do realize that if your marriage was made in the eyes of God, you're still married. Whether you're black, you're white, you're Catholic, you're not Catholic, you're married. And that is mainstreamed. Well, same-sex marriage is mainstreamed. The most successful lobby, of course, the conservatives in some circles will embrace it. Why? Because it's about power, Joe. You see, it's not about power when it comes to salvation, because God does not care. We're ants. You think God is concerned? We're fighting for crumbs. We don't see the world the way we should. Most don't. And we're here and we're gone. In plain English, and no one is going to talk about you. No one. Right. I got news for all the people out there. No one. You're forgotten. What's important is that we keep our eyes on the prize. What's important is we don't sell ourselves out. What's
But
important is what we leave to our children by our example and not our words.
but Joe, isn't
And that's
isn't was
hard, and we don't do it because we want to get invited to the barbecue.
well, yeah. I listen. I've always been that type. I had a good friend of mine. You want to talk about Joe Rossinello, the need to tell the truth to people. And I remember this like it was yesterday. This is about a good 15 years ago. I had my best friend in the world, who I could say with joy that recently I invited him back to the sacraments and he took me up on it and I brought him to a good priest. And long story short, he gave a adult confession. Some of those confessions we all need. Okay. But and so I did that for him, and I think that's providential. But what he did for me that was providential before either one of us were, and we were both baptized Catholic. Okay. He said to me in a conversation, "You just want to be loved by everybody. That's why you never open your mouth." And it was in a particular context, but it was something, Joe, when something happens to you in life, it stays with you. It stays in your memory because you learned something from it. I learned from that. And he was exactly right. And this is, like I said, was got to be over 15 years ago. And neither one of us were practicing the faith. All right. And he said to me, "You just want to be loved." That's what you were just talking about. We don't want to suffer through. Now, obviously, since then, I don't care. If you don't invite me to your barbecue, I don't really care.
But that's a
I'm
gift
not
of the Holy Spirit, Joe. You see, to do that on your own, you see, people don't understand the worth of the sacraments. You see, to do what's asked of us is impossible without them. You see, it's impossible. They don't connect that,
right.
particularly in the marriage covenant. Everything is possible with God. And when you are going to confession regularly, receiving the Eucharist in a state of grace, have a prayer life. You don't have to be a monk. Listen, like I said, we're in the valley, dude. I got to work. I got to take care of my kids. And this is not a perfect place, and it's never going to be. And everyone is going to get bruised up, and we're going to get picked up, and we're going to make amends, and we're going to reconcile, and we're going to keep moving forward. Let's be real. Let's not
Mhm.
make it like it's some perfect place. It's not for anyone. It's not for me. But here's the deal. God walks with you. He gave you the tools to help you. You take them or you're not. And here's the deal. It shows when you don't. You're
Right.
not fooling anybody.
No.
The people who have successful lives, I got news for you. Successful life isn't always a life that has tons of money. My parents were married 52 years. They raised 2 kids. They educated them. They were devoted for each other. They sacrificed for each other. They had a successful life. My father died with dignity, and my mother is now 82 and she's living with dignity. That's a successful life.
That's right.
But here's the deal. That's not a given. That doesn't magically happen.
No.
If it did, everyone would have it.
Well, you mentioned God's grace. In other words, that yes, and God will shine His grace, Joe Rossinello, and anybody who asks for it. We ask for it imperfectly many times. Okay, the sacraments of the church are not imperfect. I don't want anybody to get me the wrong way, but through prayer, many times, other people, God's going to extend His hand down. But
But
what
the
you just
sacraments are
described is the
perfect, Joe.
spirit of
Honestly,
humility.
not to cut you off, we're not. The sacraments are.
Well, no, right. That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
Okay, good,
The
good. Okay.
sacrament, yeah, no, the sacraments are perfect. We're not. Okay. But what I was trying to suggest or follow up with at the front line with Joe and Joe on the Crusade Channel is that there comes with part of the sacraments. I wish people would understand where we're going with this. Personal holiness, we always try to talk about the need for that. We talk to ourselves, to each other, to our families about the need for personal holiness. We're not preaching in that regard. Here's the difference. We're up against a culture that embraces every freaking abomination there is, okay? Doesn't recognize the need you mentioned earlier to change, Okay. That's what we're fighting against. And let me tell you something. It's a freaking hard fight, is what it is, because we live in a culture. That's why I mentioned the wasteland earlier. It's a wasteland. Now we're not going to get into it tonight. Conservative conservative Catholics are telling us that we have to embrace homosexuality, gay marriage, transgenderism, all of it. This is what we're up against. And I'm going to kick it over to you, Joe, because we only have about a minute or two left. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're here to say, yes, politics are important. Yes, culture is important. It's all important, Joe. Remember, as Paul said, we are in the world. We're not of the world. I think I'm getting that right. Okay. But so we have to fight on that level. But we have to remember these problems, and that's where we started with the gun talk, or talking about guns, ultimately come down to spirituality, ultimately come down to bending the knee, ultimately come down to sacrificing, ultimately come down to strengthening our families and doing those things we need to do that we know to be right, and sacrificing in order to make that happen. Joe Rossinello, we got about a minute left. I'm handing it over to you.
Well, it comes down to this. I mean, you will circle it back to this conversation about guns, about this tragedy. People have to look life in the face and not make excuses. Stop looking at the low-hanging fruit. Stop looking at the low-hanging fruit in your own life, but also in society. Like, let's go deeper. To go deeper can be painful for yourself. But that's where we find the solutions. That's how our lives improve. That's how the country improves. And that's what's not going on. You know, these discussions are just on the peripheral. They really are. I like from Fox News to it's all like all of it. It's just on the all of it. It's just on
Joe, that's all affirmation. That's all that is.
It's basically, we have to look deeper if we really want the solutions. But I'll be honest with you, Joe, I don't think we do, because if we did, it requires a lot of effort, and most people don't want to go there. They don't want to go there.
Joe, I'm gonna end the show with this on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. You know, Oliver Stone is not the type of guy that I really. In fact, I stopped years ago. I stopped watching his movies, and I saw all of them because he's a talented filmmaker. He really is. But he's just way too leftist, just way too ideological. But in the movie Wall Street, okay, there's a few good lines that he wrote in there. But one of them, and you just reminded me of it, Hal Holbrook, classic American actor, right? Great actor. He grabs Charlie Sheen by the shoulder after Charlie Sheen's gotten in trouble for insider trading. And he's the old crusty Wall Street guy, right? And he grabs Charlie Sheen and he says, "Bud Fox, I like you. I like you, Bud. But remember something. A man stares into the abyss and he doesn't see anything staring back at him. And that's what keeps him out of the abyss, because that's where he finds his character." Now, I'm paraphrasing. I butchered it. But that's the thing. He makes a good point, Oliver Stone, in writing that. You got to stare into that place, okay? And that's where you find your character, and that's what keeps you out of the abyss. Joe, we live in a culture where people want to just dive right in, and that's the problem. That's
Well, you know,
what
I would disagree with his assessment, because when we are willing and unafraid to stare in the abyss, God is there, and God will guide us through it. You see, but that requires, again, a change. And we have to be willing to make that change, to bend our knee, to say, "I'm sorry." And then we don't fear the abyss. We look at it square in the face and say, "You don't frighten me."
Right.
Because I have conquered you. And that's what we need to do. And that only takes place through the grace of God. And that's what America needs to embrace.
Joe Rossinello, I can't think of a better place to end the conversation, which has been a great conversation, at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. We went way into the breach tonight on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Thank you, Mike Church, for giving us a platform on Crusade Channel. We're very grateful for it. We thank you all for joining us, following us on our social media at the Frontline TV, the Frontline TV on YouTube. Remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We will talk to you